So when the Berlin Wall fell, the West promised this brand new era of prosperity for Eastern Europe. But what if that whole promise was, well, kind of a mirage? Today, we're going to dive into Michael Parenti's really challenging account in Blackshirts and Reds and explore how that dream of a free market paradise may have turned into a pretty harsh reality for millions.
Okay, let's just start with this quote because, wow, this is from the head of the U.S. Information Agency back in 1990, and it tells you so much. The idea that vipers and bloodsuckers are what make a country click. I mean, that wasn't just some off-the-cuff remark. Parenti argues this was basically the playbook, the core ideology being shipped over to the East. It really set the stage for a pretty ruthless kind of capitalism.
So what was the sales pitch? Well, it was a really simple and powerful story about a golden future. Now, the people pushing this new system, they did admit, okay, yeah, there are going to be some bumps in the road, but they insisted it was just some short-term pain for some amazing long-term gain.
The phrase they kept using was a difficult period. It sounds so temporary and manageable, doesn't it? The whole theory was that this quick, sharp dose of economic shock therapy would just reset everything and then, boom, wealth and opportunity for everybody. But Parenti's whole analysis forces us to ask a really tough question. Was this just a passing storm, or was this the new, permanent weather? And more importantly, who was actually getting caught in the rain?
And that leads us right into the first major outcome that Parenti breaks down. See, instead of this widespread prosperity that was promised, what emerged almost right away was this really stark economic split, a new and incredibly dramatic class divide.
This right here is the heart of Parenti's argument, and honestly, it's a bombshell. He says this new system wasn't like a rising tide that lifts all boats. Nope, it was more like a salvage operation, where a tiny elite basically stripped the wealth of the nation for themselves and just left the majority of people to sink.
You know, this line from a young Russian journalist, it just cuts right to the bone. This isn't some dry economic textbook talking. This is the raw, real experience of watching your whole world get turned upside down. It felt like the economy wasn't about shared growth anymore. It was this brutal zero-sum game where your neighbor's new sports car was somehow directly connected to you not being able to afford groceries. Now get this, what's so shocking is the sheer scale of it all. According to the book, within just a few years of these new market reforms, a staggering 75 to 85% of all Russians were living at or below the poverty line. That difficult period was quickly becoming a permanent state of being for almost everyone.
And this new kind of brutal economic reality, it didn't just happen in a bubble. It sent shockwaves through every single part of daily life. Parenti makes the case that the entire social fabric of these countries was put through its own form of shock therapy, and the results were pretty devastating.
I mean, just look at this list. Parenti paints a really grim picture of society just fraying at the seams. Things that used to be almost unheard of were suddenly everywhere. Full employment was replaced by huge lines at unemployment offices. Homelessness, once super rare, became a visible crisis. And crime, pollution, violence, they didn't just tick up a little bit. He argues they exploded, tearing society apart.
And it's not just an academic argument. Here's a Russian business leader giving you a street-level view of that collapse. This wasn't about losing a few government perks. This was the systematic takedown of an entire social safety net. All those services that people had just taken for granted their whole lives, healthcare, education, even daycare and libraries, they were either shut down or suddenly had a price tag that ordinary people just couldn't afford. Okay, and check out this paradox that Parenti brings up. It's kind of wild. He claims that under the old system, the so-called police state, you actually needed relatively few police to handle street crime. But in the brand new free market paradise, cities like Prague had to expand their police force by a huge amount just to deal with the massive surge in crime.
The impact was cultural too. It wasn't just about money and crime. State funding for the arts and for literature just got slashed. National film industries were sold off. And yeah, the market was suddenly flooded with cheap Western paperbacks, but Parenti argues that overall readership absolutely plummeted because books and education just became too expensive for most people.
So you have to ask, who paid the highest price for all these massive changes? Parenti is really clear on this. While life got tougher for a lot of people, the consequences were absolutely catastrophic for the most vulnerable groups in society.
And the human cost becomes incredibly real when you look at stats like this. In the years right after reunification, the death rate for East German women in their late 30s shot up by 20%. And for men the same age, it jumped by an absolutely astonishing 30%. This wasn't just an economic downturn, it was a full-blown public health crisis.
And that data point, it has a human voice. Listen to what this East German woman said. It really captures that slow, painful realization that all these rights and securities they'd always had, like incredible state-supported childcare and guaranteed job security, were just gone.
The book details what it describes as a systematic dismantling of protections for women. Paid maternity leave and a guaranteed job to come back to? Gone. The number of women in politics? It dropped off a cliff. At the exact same time, reports of domestic violence went through the roof, and the state committees that used to step in to help, well, they didn't exist anymore.
And then there were the children, who were hit unbelievably hard. Social programs like free summer camps and after-school activities just vanished. But Parenti points to something way, way darker: the rise of organized crime that specifically targeted kids. This observation here, from a specialist at the Council of Europe, it reveals a horrifying new reality of kidnapping and exploitation.
So after living through all this, after the shock therapy, how were people actually feeling about the free market paradise they'd been promised? Well, the book argues that disillusionment didn't just creep in, it hit like a tidal wave.
You know, sometimes a joke tells you more than a dozen newspaper articles. There was this one going around Russia just a couple of years after the fall of the USSR, and it just perfectly captures the mood. It's a really bitter punchline, but it speaks to this profound sense of regret and a complete rethinking of the past.
And it wasn't just jokes. The polling data that Parenti points to, it tells the exact same story. In both Russia and Poland, you see these huge majorities saying they wanted to keep the core pieces of the old social safety net, things like state price controls, guaranteed jobs, welfare, subsidized housing. It seems the desire wasn't for some wild, unfettered capitalism, it was for security.
This quote from a former East German official it completely flips the script on the whole debate. It's such a bitter, ironic way to redefine the word freedom, right? It's a really provocative statement that makes you stop and ask, what does freedom even mean if you don't have basic security?
And really, that's the big question that Parenti's analysis leaves us with. How should we measure if a society is successful? Is it about the number of billionaires and the variety of stuff you can buy in a store? Or is it about the basic social security, the health, and the well-being of the entire population? It's a question that was urgent then, and it feels just as relevant today.